Welcome, and thank you for choosing to come on this tour where we explore the factories that forged an empire. My name is Richie Smithgore, and I'm a local historian for the Royal Arsenal Woolwich. This tour spans 2,000 years of history that shaped two empires and founded two branches of the British military and one rather famous soccer team. We'll start the tour here at the end of the pier. Let us take a few moments to stay here and admire Old Father Thames, the lifeblood of the city of Londinium, the original Roman name for what we now call London. The Roman settlement, which was founded around 47 to 50 AD, soon grew into a major port, bringing with it great wealth. This made it a target for attack, and from 190 AD, the construction of the London Wall was started to defend from land attack. This did, however, leave the river and its ports and warehouses vulnerable. Look down the river. Now imagine you see enemy ships rounding the headland en route to Londinium for a raid. See how far you are able to see downriver. This is why the Roman garrison was based here as part of the early warning system. There would also have been others further downstream to the estuary. Now look upriver and imagine you and your garrison riding as fast as you can to warn Londinium. You'll pass Greenwich, another base for a garrison as part of the system. When they see you riding towards them with a banner signalling attack, they'll mount up and head to the city, and so will you. The safety of the great city lies in all your hands. So from a small garrison of Roman soldiers, the town of Woolwich was born. Let's go and explore, shall we? Head up the ramp of this pier and walk inland. The structure we are on is called the Woolwich Pier, or Royal Arsenal Pier. It was designed by Beckett Rankin and built in 2002. It is served by Thames Clippers, who are currently branded as Uber Boat. Upstream a little bit, you might see the Woolwich Free Ferry operating, transporting vehicles and passengers across the river. There has been a crossing here since the Norman Conquest of 1066. At the end of the pier, your only option is to turn left. Take the stairs or ramp to your right and head into the centre of the rusty-looking people. You'll pass two pepper pot buildings against the modern river wall. These are the old guard houses for the river access to the site. Think of them as passport control and customs, making sure that dangerous foreign spies or saboteurs don't get access via the ships and that guns and ammunition aren't being stolen. The one you pass is now Con Gusto, an excellent Italian restaurant well worth checking out for the food and its unique style. Stop here, please. This piece of art is called Assembly and was created by artist Peter Burke in 2005. Let's take a moment to appreciate and interact with the installation. There are 16 human forms coming together in an assembly, with the centre being more concentrated. They reference the workers of the factories and also the industrial nature of the area. All of the statues are 3/4 of a full human cast bolted together. The piece was commissioned by Future City, who explains, Assembly acknowledges that there is tension between the reading of an image of the human form and the effect that the physicality of materials and process have on that understanding. The work was conceived as an assembly of persons, of parts and spaces which can finally be assembled by the viewer. I don't know about you, but I just think they look amazing. When you're ready, head up number 1 Street. With your back to the river, it's between the two factory buildings in front of you. To your right is the Ordnance factory and workshop, built over phases from about 1805. It has a carpentry workshop and was used for the packing of ammunition. Like most buildings, its use varied over time. On your left, it looks like one building, but there are actually two that have been linked together. The river-facing one was offices for the factories. The rear building, with the large bay windows, was the paper cartridge factory, both built around 1855. The buildings on either side of you form the Woolwich Works. This is a registered charity opening September 2021. The centre will host performances, plays, rehearsal spaces, and you can even get married here. These buildings were previously firepower at the Royal Artillery Museum, which closed in 2016. Now turn right into Artillery Square, heading to the building with the doorway in the centre. This building sits on the footprint of a Tudor mansion called Tower Place, built in 1540s. Around this time, Woolwich Dockyard had been established for the building of ships. In 1651, the owners gave permission for the Board of Ordnance to begin proving guns on Woolwich Warren, the area we were walking around today. Around 1667, the Board of Ordnance acquired Tower Place and built Prince Rupert's Battery. as a result of the raids of Medway by the Dutch, which was a disaster for the British fleet. Yet again, Woolwich was to defend London from attack. When you get close to the building, let's stop for a moment. In 1716, in what would have been the rooms to the right of the current door, two of the most important branches of the military were given royal charters to come into being: the Royal Regiment of Artillery and the Royal Engineers. By 1720, Tower Place was all but ruins, and so the building you see before you was erected. Called the Academy, it was a training centre for commissioned officers of the Royal Artillery and the Engineers. Over the years, it has been used as an officers' mess, the first Royal Artillery Museum, a wedding venue, and most recently a dance studio. It is currently awaiting redevelopment as part of the Woolwich Works. By the way, this is home to one of the most saucy ghosts of the site, possibly the mistress of the Duke of Wellington, who was Master General of the Board of Ordnance between 1819 and 1827. Now, turn around and head back across Artillery Square, as we are going to continue up number 1 street we were walking up. In front of you is Duke of Wellington Avenue. Turn right back up number 1 street. On your left you will see the new build called the Warehouse. This sits on the site of the Great Pile, which were warehouses for storing pieces of artillery for both land and sea use. When this was built, the excavations revealed Roman urns containing human remains, thus proving the theory of Woolwich being a Roman garrison town. These have now been given to the British Museum, and sadly they're not on display. The building on your right is the old Laboratory East building, which was built in 1694, and is the oldest surviving ordnance building in the country, possibly the world. It has an identical sister behind it, which is not visible from here. It is also the oldest building on site. It was used for the making of fireworks and gunpowder, and later research and development. Surprisingly, it is only a Grade 2 listed building, like most of the buildings on site. As you continue up number 1 street, you will see an imposing building straight ahead with a large brass gun in front of it. We're going to stop by the gun and take a look at the brass foundry. In 1716, while the Royal Regiments of Artillery and Engineers were being formed at Tower Place, something else was happening in the City of London. During this time, the Square Mile at the heart of London was the financial capital of the world. It was also home to the Moorfields factory, making guns similar to the one we stand by. This one is actually Prussian, captured by the Royal Artillery, but you get the idea. One fateful day, they were casting guns in the factory, but the sand in which the gun casts were sitting buried in the ground was wet. As they poured the molten brass, the moisture in the sand was immediately turned into steam. The steam found the quickest way out via the gun casts, and the molten metal erupted like a volcano out of the casts. The Factory 4 was split in two, and 17 people were killed in the explosion. Take a look at the date in the arch over the door of the brass foundry in front of us. It reads 1717, which was just 1 year after that explosion. The impressive look of the building is very much to show visiting diplomats the strength and the power of the British war machine. The building is, however, very practical. Look at the high tower which allowed winching equipment to get the cast guns out of the pits they were poured in. The big double doors with a ramp to wheel the guns out ready to be finished. The rooms either side for making and storing gun casts. Now let's take the path to the left of the brass foundry, to the worn-looking statue leaning against the side of the foundry. This is a late Roman statue of Deus Lunus. The male counterpart of Dea Luna, female embodiment of the moon. It was dug up by British troops in Alexandria, Egypt in 1801 and shipped to London. Essentially, when you or I go on holiday, we might send back a postcard. When soldiers go away, they send back massive stone statues. Now let's head up to the set of gates at the entrance straight ahead on this path. As we walk towards the gate, you will see the guardhouse on the right after the brass foundry. It is now a rather good gastropub. This was the main security for the site, built in 1788. There were cells inside to house spies, saboteurs, or drunken workers. Let's stop for a moment outside the guardhouse to look at the large modern statue. This is the goddess Nike, who was the Greek goddess of victory, daughter of Pallas, the titan of battle. She would fly across a battlefield, crowning the victorious with laurel wreaths. She's been the symbol for the modern Olympic Games since Amsterdam, 1928, and appears on the back of the Olympic medals. Now let's move to the gates just beyond the guardhouse, continuing on the path. As we look out of the gates, you can see the original main entrance to the site. This more impressive entrance was set adrift in the late 20th century, when land was sold to build a dual carriageway that now runs between us and the entrance. Now turn to your left to the large house, which is now a solicitor's. Head towards it. This is the Verbruggen house, built in 1772 for Jan Verbruggen and his family. He became the master founder of the site after emigrating from the Netherlands in 1770. Jan had this house built as he wanted to live on site. Jan made significant improvements to technology and quality at the Arsenal. Now, walk across the grass on your left, heading towards the central arch of the long building in front of you. When you are standing on the grass between some black painted cannons, stop and take a look at the building in front of you. This is the dial arch factory. This is where guns poured in the brass foundry, to your left, came to be polished and finished, ready to be put on carriages. Just like the foundry, look at the large arch which was needed to wheel in the guns for finishing. Look through the arch and past the bar that is there. You can see another arch for wheeling the finished guns out and onto the great pile we passed earlier. Well, the warehouse, as the new build is now. This is now a very popular gastropub on the site and well worth a stop for a drink. Just to warn you, however, this building also used to house the morgue. When this building was converted into a pub, the part with the best plumbing was converted to the toilets. Morgues have great plumbing to wash away the autopsy tables. Now, turn around and look at this square of grass in front of the dial arch. Imagine it is late 1886 and the factories have let out for lunch. After eating, the men have a kickabout on the patch of grass. They rate themselves pretty highly and decide to form a team. The Dial Arch Football Club. On the 11th of December 1886, they win their first match 6-0 against Eastern Wanderers. Soon the management of the factories take note and help rename the team Royal Arsenal Football Club. When some players from Nottingham Forest were recruited to the factories and the team, they asked their old team for spare kit, and the RA Football Club begins to play in red, never to change. They now took the name Woolwich Arsenal. Although a very successful club, it had financial difficulties, being based in South London, so in 1913 moved to Highbury, North London. A year later, dropped the word Woolwich. Yes, listeners, you are currently standing on the birthplace of the world-famous soccer team, Arsenal Football Club. With your back to the Dial Arch pub, turn to your left along the grass to return to the path. Take a left down the path. As we head to rejoin the path, in front of you is the Woolwich Station for Crossrail, or as it's officially called, the Elizabeth Line, due to open summer 2021. The Christian St. Barbara is the patron saint of explosions. The Royal Regiment of Artillery, the miners that built Crossrail, and the Royal Arsenal factory workers all share the same patron saint. As we pass the Dial Arch on our left, we will go down the road in front of us. If you fancy a coffee, there is a good place on the corner of the building in front of you, on the right. This building is the carriage works. When a cannon is made and finished, this is the building where the carriage it will sit on is made. As we walk down the road, look out for the big archways again to move the materials in and the carriages out. As we get to the end of the road, cross to the far side of the intersection. As we come to the junction of Major Draper Street and the Duke of Wellington Avenue, look at the buildings to the right and left. These are the danger buildings where gunpowder and later TNT were put into cartridges. During the First World War, there were not enough men to work in the arsenal, so women entered the factories for the first time in a capacity other than canteens or as secretaries. They were allowed to work in danger buildings like the one on your left, but not in the carriage works on your right, which was considered skilled work. When we are about opposite the concierge on the right, let's stop for a moment to think of the role of women on the site. As the war to end all wars intensified, the need for the factories that surround you was never more great. They had to work at maximum capacity for as much of the day as was possible. Let's walk on and cross Carriage Street. As we cross the road, the building in front of you is Central Offices. Built between 1905 and 1911, the idea was to bring together all the separate factory offices to make the whole complex work more efficiently. So here we have what we call Building 22, the home of the government military bureaucrat. When Berkeley Homes began converting the buildings into apartments, this was one of the first to be refurbished, as there was already plenty of plumbing for all the tea rooms for the civil servants, which could be converted into bathrooms and kitchens. The arsenal reached its peak during the Great War. The site stretched for 3.5 miles along the Thames, covering 1,300 acres. There were 80,000 people employed, and it was the beating heart of the war effort. At the corner opposite, you will see huge metal objects that were used for steel production that took place on site in a factory that is now the Duke of Wellington Park ahead of us. Now turn left down Arsenal Way and keep going. When you are parallel to the building on your right with the ornate gates and cannons flanking the entrance, stop for a moment. In the 20 years between the World Wars, the significant military development for the arsenal was the bomber aeroplane. Our enemy could now reach right into the country and attack. Having your entire war machine in one location was no longer an option, and plans were drafted to close the site completely. New factories were built across the country in top-secret locations. Whilst the original plan was to close the Royal Arsenal, there was an issue that kept some production at the site. Many of the skilled workers with families in the local area refused to relocate to other parts of the country. So during the Second World War, there was a significant production of shells and guns at the site, but not on the scale of the previous war. The building on your right is all that remains of the steel foundry that was torn down at this stage. This entrance was actually part of an even older building, but was so stunning that when the steelworks was built, it was kept as the office and entrance. During the Great Destruction, someone attempted to steal these gates and was caught with them on the back of a truck at the security gate at the end of Duke of Wellington Avenue. Now, continue down this road and cross over when you get to the junction. By the way, there is a statue of the Duke in the park that used to sit where we are heading to. On rainy days, a worker would be sent out to put a bowler hat on the statue to keep the Duke dry. The building in front of you is the Grand Store. Stop for a moment in front of it. In the 1990s, all the buildings on site were given a condition assessment ahead of redevelopment. Whilst what you see looks impressive, given its poor original foundations, it was actually in a terrible state. What you see now stretching off to the right as you look at the building is only 2/3 of the original. The final third was in such a poor repair, it had to be torn down. This section had to have new foundations retrofitted. Let's keep moving. Facing the Grand Store, head off to the left. The first building on our right was the site's own telephone exchange. The second is the new laboratory. In this building, TNT and torpedoes were invented. After the redevelopment, the far end of the building was used as a TV studio. Keep going. At the end of the building, head right onto the grass to the big grey cannon. It's a naval cannon that we are walking to and was placed here by the Royal Artillery Museum during the development as a place to live as a reminder of its military past. Curators at the museum spent 3 days calculating the position perfectly. Now, if it was fired, the shell would fly across the Thames through the 8th floor of a hospital to slow its trajectory and would land and explode on the centre spot of West Ham's old football ground. We've reached the final stop of the tour. Let's now stop at the naval cannon. As the Royal Arsenal headed into the new millennium, its future was once again linked to Old Father Thames. Up the river in London during the 1980s and 90s, old warehouses had been converted along the Thames into trendy apartments for young, upcoming professionals, or yuppies as they were called. There was money to be made in converting these old buildings, and the river-facing ones carried a premium. If you look forwards to the new build towers, the river-facing apartments get more expensive the higher you go up. Apartments looking upstream to Greenwich are actually more expensive than those looking downstream to Erith. Without this development, a significant part of our collective history would have crumbled to dust. Instead, we are here in the heart of a vibrant community of 3,000 plus residents. The Royal Arsenal, reborn for the 21st century. This is where I'll be leaving you. Thank you for coming on my tour. I do hope you've enjoyed it. Thanks.